She stood on land worth $500 million, pointing her finger at a man she thought was nobody. "Move your equipment, now, or I'll have this whole property seized by Friday." The man didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, just looked at her the way the land itself might look at someone who didn't understand what roots mean: steady, ancient, and completely unmoved. What Clara Dawson didn't know, couldn't have known, was that the quiet, sun-weathered man leaning against that rusted fence post owned every acre she was standing on, owned the water running 60 feet beneath her shoes, and held the single legal document that could bring an entire billion-dollar empire to its knees. She'd come to Red Hollow to save herself. She had no idea she was about to save everyone else. If this story moves you, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit like, and stay with me until the very end. You won't regret it. The town of Red Hollow, Texas sat about 90 miles southeast of Abilene in a stretch of country that most people drove through without stopping. Flat horizon, dry grass gone amber in October, cattle standing still as fence posts along both sides of the highway. There was a diner, a feed store, a post office the size of a garage, and a water tower that still had the high school football score from 2019 painted on it in faded blue letters. Nobody had bothered to wash it off. In Red Hollow, that kind of thing counted as history. The town had roughly 800 people, though that number swelled some on weekends when ranching families came in from the surrounding land to buy groceries or grab breakfast at Patsy's Diner on Main. Most of those families had been working the same acreage for 2 or 3 generations. They knew each other's grandparents. They knew which wells ran dry in August and which roads flooded in spring. They knew things about the land that couldn't be written down, the kind of knowledge that lived in the hands and the lower back and the memory of every drought survived. Clara Dawson did not know any of this when she drove into Red Hollow at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning in October, a travel mug of cold gas station coffee wedged between her thigh and the center console, her phone mounted on the dashboard showing GPS directions to a pasture address that her supervisor had texted her the night before. She drove a company car, a silver Chevy Tahoe, barely a year old, leased by Meridian Land Development out of Dallas. It had that particular smell of new plastic and carpet cleaner that Clara had come to associate with jobs that required you to pretend you were more important than you were. She'd been driving company cars for 6 years. She still didn't own one of her own. Her directions took her off the state highway and onto a county road paved in sections, crumbling at the edges where the callous shoulder met the blacktop. She passed a hand-painted sign for fresh eggs, a cattle gate tied shut with baling wire, a mailbox shaped like a longhorn. Then the road curved around a stand of cedar trees and opened up onto a wide brown pasture where a man was working a tractor along the far fence line, pulling something behind it that threw up a small dust trail. Clara stopped the car, checked her phone, checked the property survey printout on the passenger seat, and confirmed she was in the right place. She got out. The morning air hit her immediately, cold and clean in a way that Dallas air never was, carrying the smell of dried grass and something faintly mineral, like wet rock. She stood beside the car for a moment, squinting across the pasture at the tractor. It was a Tuesday. She had a meeting with county commissioners at 10, a call with her regional director at noon, and a deadline that had been described to her as non-negotiable so many times in the past 2 weeks that the phrase had started appearing in her dreams. She didn't have time to wait for a ranch hand to finish his rounds. She walked toward the fence. Clara had grown up in Corpus Christi, in a house with a leaking roof and a mother who worked double shifts at a hospital laundry. Her childhood wasn't the kind that gets described as hard in a way that sounds romantic. It was just grinding, the slow, dull pressure of never having enough, of watching the electric bill decide whether you ate dinner or kept the lights on, not both. She'd gotten herself through college on scholarships and part-time jobs, graduated with a business degree and a tolerance for discomfort that most of her classmates didn't have. She'd taken the job at Meridian because it paid well and offered a path. Regional director in 5 years if she closed enough deals. She'd been chasing that path for 6 years. It kept moving. Her debt situation was, to use the technical term, a disaster. Student loans, a medical bill from an emergency appendix surgery 2 years ago that her insurance had covered only in part, a personal loan she'd taken out to help her mother after the Corpus Christi house finally needed a new roof. She was not behind on payments. She was meticulous about that. almost obsessively so. But she was also 30 years old, sleeping in a one-bedroom apartment in a part of Dallas that was only acceptable because it was close to the highway, and she had, at last count, $412 in her savings account. The Red Hollow deal was supposed to fix that. A successful acquisition and land survey project of this scale would earn her a bonus that could actually change the math of her life. Her director, a man named Preston Wyatt, who wore cufflinks and referred to rural landowners as obstacles, had made it clear that this was her project to win or lose. So Clara walked across a stranger's pasture at 7 in the morning in her good boots, which were not ranch boots, which were the kind of ankle boots you wore to Dallas business meetings, and which were absolutely not designed for uneven ground, because she needed this to go right. Whoosh. She reached the fence line as the tractor completed its loop and came back toward her. The man driving it cut the engine when he noticed her standing there, and for a moment there was just the sound of the engine ticking down and the wind moving through the dried grass. He climbed down from the cab. He was maybe 6 feet tall, wearing a canvas jacket the color of old brick, jeans that had been washed so many times they'd gone pale at the knees, and boots that were the real thing, cracked leather, crusted at the toe with real dirt, the kind you earned by wearing them every day for years. He had dark hair going a little gray at the temples, a jaw that needed shaving, and the kind of stillness that some people have naturally and others spend years trying to perform. He looked to be in his early 30s, maybe. He walked toward the fence slowly, not in the way of someone reluctant, but in the way of someone who didn't see a reason to hurry. "Morning," he said. "Good morning." Clara had her clipboard out, which felt suddenly ridiculous. "I'm Clara Dawson with Meridian Land Development out of Dallas. I'm the project coordinator for the Red Hollow acquisition. Are you the property manager here?" He considered the question for a moment. "I work the land." "Okay." She took that as a yes. "I need this equipment moved back from the eastern fence line by end of week. We have survey crews coming in Thursday morning, and this whole section needs to be accessible." She indicated the tractor behind him with a gesture. "Can you make sure whoever is in charge knows that?" He looked at the tractor, then back at her. "What survey crews?" "Meridian is acquiring parcels in this area for a development project. The county has been notified. We're beginning preliminary surveys this week, and we need clear access along the eastern and southern lines." She heard herself and recognized the tone. It was the tone Preston Wyatt used on phone calls, the one that implied the conversation was already over. She hated the tone. She used it anyway because it usually worked. "This is future company property, and we need future company property," he said. Not a question, not hostile, just repeating it back like he was checking whether she'd really said it. "Yes." She met his eyes. They were an ordinary enough color, sir, dark, maybe brown, but there was something about how steadily he held her gaze that made her want to look away first. She didn't. "Can you let whoever's in charge know?" "I'll let them know," he said. He said it without any particular expression, and then he just looked at her for a moment, not rudely, not with anything she could name, before turning back toward the tractor. Clara stood there for a second with her clipboard. "Thank you," she said, because she didn't know what else to say. He didn't answer. He climbed back up into the tractor cab, settled into the seat, and started the engine. The morning swallowed her words, and the machine noise took over, and Clara walked back to the Tahoe, feeling, for a reason she couldn't quite identify, like she'd done something vaguely wrong. She shook the feeling off. She had a meeting at 10. The county commissioner's office smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. Clara sat across from a man named Gerald Briggs, who wore a bolo tie and read her acquisition documents with the slow deliberation of someone who had never once felt rushed in his professional life. The conference room had a window that looked out onto Main Street. Clara watched a truck go by pulling a horse trailer. Then another truck. A woman walked a dog. A man came out of the feed store carrying a bag of something on his shoulder. "These survey coordinates," Gerald said without looking up, "overlap with the Callaway Ranch." "That's correct. We have parcels under negotiation." "Under negotiation." Gerald looked up now. He had the face of a man who'd spent 40 years outdoors and come inside too late. "Miss Dawson, the Callaway Ranch has been in that family for 112 years. "I understand that." She kept her voice steady. "But the property records show—" "I know what the property records show." He set the papers down flat on the table. Not hard, not dramatically, just flat. Finished. I'm telling you what the situation is on the ground. You're new to this area, so I'm just letting you know. Meridian has been in contact with the county zoning board. Gerald folded his hands. That's different from being in contact with the people who own the land. Clara wrote nothing down. She sat very still. Has anyone from Meridian spoken directly with the Calloway family? Gerald smiled in a way that wasn't warm. Somebody sent a letter. I see. She looked at her papers. Do you know the family? Everybody in Red Hollow knows Ethan Calloway. Gerald picked up his coffee mug, which had the Texas state flag on it and appeared to have last been washed sometime during a previous administration. His great-granddaddy started that ranch. Ethan runs it now. Has since he was about 24 after his father passed. A pause. He's had some hard years. Raises his little girl out there alone. Good man. Clara filed this away. Not emotionally. She didn't have room for emotional right now, but practically. Good standing in the community. Established roots, potentially difficult to negotiate with. She dealt with resistant landowners before. The key was usually to identify what they actually wanted underneath the resistance. I'd like to set up a meeting with Mr. Calloway, she said. I imagine you would. Gerald stood, which meant the meeting was over. You might try the feed store on Thursdays. He comes in most weeks. Clara drove back to the motel. A place called the Lone Star Inn, 12 rooms, a vending machine that took cash only, and sat on the edge of the bed with her laptop and a stack of folders. She'd been allocated 2 weeks to complete the preliminary survey and acquisition phase. 2 weeks, and then she needed to return to Dallas with signed documents or a clear plan for compulsion. She opened the acquisition folder and started reading from the beginning. She read for 4 hours. She took notes. She cross-referenced. She made herself a second cup of motel coffee, which tasted approximately like hot brown water, and kept reading. By midnight, she had a headache starting at the base of her skull. But she also had a growing sense, not yet alarm, not yet, of something that didn't add up. The acquisition documents described a straightforward land purchase, a development project, retail and residential expansion into underutilized rural land, standard Meridian language. But there was a secondary annexure. She almost missed it. It was labeled as a water rights amendment, buried between 2 zoning variance documents, and it was written in the particular way of legal language that wants to explain something without fully explaining it. Clara read it 3 times. Then she set it aside and told herself she'd look at it again in the morning when she wasn't tired. She looked at it again in the morning. It said the same thing. She went to the feed store on Thursday. It was a squat, metal-sided building at the edge of Main Street with a loading dock out front and sacks of cattle feed stacked under a corrugated awning. It smelled like grain and mineral supplements and the particular dusty warmth of animals that aren't present but recently were. A mounted longhorn skull hung above the door. Clara walked under it feeling moderately absurd in her business casual jacket. There were 4 people inside when she entered. An old man examining a catalog, a woman in her 50s filling out a form, a teenager loading something onto a hand truck in the back, and the man from the fence. She recognized him immediately, which surprised her because she'd only seen him once and briefly. But there was something about the way he stood that was specific. The particular weight of his attention on whatever he was doing, which right now was talking to the man behind the counter about a part for some piece of equipment Clara couldn't have named. She walked to the counter and waited. He glanced at her. A small, brief flicker of recognition. Then back to the counter guy. Should be the same fitting as the '09 model. If not, I'll bring it back. Fair enough. I'll order 2. A nod. He picked up the paper receipt, folded it in half, and put it in his jacket pocket. Then he turned to look at her fully. Miss Dawson. He remembered her name. She wasn't sure why that surprised her. Mr. She realized she didn't have his last name. The ranch hand from the fence had given her nothing. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name last time. Calloway, he said. Ethan. The name hit her like something physical. She processed it fast, Gerald's voice saying everybody in Red Hollow knows Ethan Calloway, and rearranged her understanding of who she was looking at. Not the ranch hand, not a property manager. The owner. She stopped, recalibrated, extended her hand. Clara Dawson. Meridian Land Development. I was hoping I I know who you are. He shook her hand. His grip was unremarkable, not crushing, not limp, just a handshake. You're the one who wants me to move my tractor. There it was. Not said with particular meanness, but Clara felt it anyway. The precision of it, the accuracy, the fact that her first impression with this man had been that of someone issuing orders on property she didn't own. I owe you an apology for that, she said. She surprised herself. She hadn't planned to say it. He looked at her for a moment. Apology for what? I spoke to you like you were... She stopped. I didn't have accurate information about who you were. Would it have changed how you talked to me? The question landed quietly, like something dropped from a height. She opened her mouth, closed it. The honest answer was she didn't know. The professional answer was yes, of course. The true answer was somewhere between those, and she wasn't quite willing to say it out loud. He watched her not answer, and something shifted in his expression, not unkindly. You wanted a meeting, he said. Yes. I've got 20 minutes. They sat on a bench outside the feed store, which Clara would not have predicted as a meeting venue for a negotiation of this scale, but she had a feeling that pointing this out would not help her case. She laid out the Meridian proposal. She did it professionally, clearly, without the Wyatt cufflinks energy, just the facts as she understood them. Development project. Land acquisition. Fair market value plus 20%. Infrastructure improvements that would benefit the broader area. Ethan listened. He sat with his forearms resting on his knees and his hands loosely linked, and he listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he said, What about the spring? She paused. The spring. He looked at her. On the eastern edge, below the pasture. You've seen it in the survey maps. She had. It appeared in the survey documents as a natural spring source, a feature that the acquisition documents noted as part of the parcel's water rights. She'd thought about the secondary annexure all week, and she still wasn't sure she fully understood what it meant. What about it? She said. That spring feeds 17 properties in this area. He said it simply, not angrily. Has for as long as anybody's been here. There's no municipal water out this way. Ranching families, a few older homes, all of them running off that aquifer. Clara wrote nothing down. She was very aware of not writing this down. The development project's going to need water, he said. Big project like what you're describing, retail, residential. That's a significant draw. Where's it coming from? The engineering team already told someone where it's coming from. He looked at her steadily. I'm asking if you know. Clara sat on that bench in the October morning with the sound of a truck going by on Main and a dog barking somewhere down the street, and she felt the secondary annexure sitting in her laptop bag like something with weight. I'm going to look into it, she said. It wasn't the answer a Meridian project coordinator was supposed to give, but it was the only truthful one she had. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood and dusted his hands on his jeans in a gesture that was habitual, automatic, the gesture of someone who works with them constantly. You can look into it, he said. I'm not signing anything in the meantime. That's your right. It is. He picked up the paper bag with his equipment part. You have a card? She gave him one. He looked at it for a moment. The Meridian logo, her name, her title, her Dallas number, and put it in his jacket pocket with the receipt. Thank you for coming in person, he said. Most of your company just sends letters. He walked to his truck, a dark green F250 that had seen better years, and drove away. Clara sat on the bench for a moment with her folder on her knees. Then she took out her phone and called Preston Wyatt. You're overthinking it, Preston said. He had the voice of a man who had spent his entire career being the smartest person in any room he'd decided to enter. Preston, it says the project's water draw is being rerouted through the existing aquifer system. That's engineering language. The engineering team handles, it says draw from existing sources. Clara was in the parking lot of the Lone Star Inn with the wind coming at her sideways and her jacket not quite warm enough. Preston, if that spring dries up, 17 properties in this area lose their primary water source. A silence that was doing a lot of work. Water rights in Texas are complex, Preston said. That's why we have lawyers. I know water rights are complex. I'm asking you to tell me straight. Is the Meridian project planning to draw from that aquifer? Another silence. Clara. The voice shifted. The friendly but firm register that people use when they want to redirect you without seeming to. This project is a $200 million investment. We are 3 months from breaking ground on phase 1. Your job, your specific job, is to complete the acquisition phase. That's it. Engineering is not your department. It becomes my department when I'm the one sitting across from the landowner. Then tell the landowner what he needs to hear to sign the papers. She stared at the parking lot. A tumble of dead leaves blew across the asphalt. What he needs to hear, she said, or what's true. The silence this time had a different quality. Sharp, edged. I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that, Preston said, because you're tired and you're in the middle of nowhere and it sounds like you're getting attached to a deal instead of closing it. Get some sleep, Clara. Let's talk tomorrow. He hung up. Clara stood in the parking lot for a while after that. The stars above Red Hollow were unreasonably bright. There was no competing light out here, nothing to wash them out. She didn't spend much time looking at stars in Dallas. She spent most of her time looking at screens and ceilings and the face of whoever was across from her in a negotiation. She went inside and pulled out the secondary annexure and read it a 5th time. The language was careful, very careful. Carefully vague in the specific way of legal documents that are designed to permit something without naming it. But the math was simple if you pulled in the engineering projections from the other annexure, the one about projected daily water draw, and cross-referenced it with the aquifer survey from the county environmental office that she'd requested 2 days ago and that had arrived in her email that afternoon. She did the math. Then she did it again because she'd made an error the first time. She'd hoped she'd made an error. But she got the same number both times. At the projected draw rate, the aquifer would be critically depleted within 4 to 7 years of full project operation. 17 families. She kept coming back to that number, not a statistic. Ethan had said it like it was people he knew, because they were. She saved the calculations, closed her laptop, lay on the motel bed staring at the water-stained ceiling and did not sleep very much. She didn't plan to meet the daughter. She'd been driving past the ranch on her way to a second county records meeting. She'd started taking the longer route without entirely acknowledging why, when she saw a child sitting on top of a fence rail outside the front gate, very still, holding something in her lap. Clara pulled over because the child was maybe 7 years old and appeared to be alone on a fence rail on a county road, which was the kind of thing you stopped for. She got out. The girl looked up. She had her father's dark eyes and a red coat that was slightly too big for her and her hair in 2 braids that someone had started carefully and finished in a rush. She was holding a book, an actual paper book, the old illustrated kind, open on her lap. "Hi," Claire said. "Hi." The girl looked at her without alarm. Kids in Red Hollow apparently didn't approach strangers with the same wariness as city kids. "Are you lost?" "No. I saw you sitting out here by yourself and wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm waiting for my dad." The girl held up the book. "I'm reading." "What are you reading?" The girl showed her the cover. Charlotte's Web. "That's a good one," Clara said. "It makes me cry every time, but I keep reading it." She said this with the matter-of-fact quality of someone who has made peace with this fact about themselves. "I'm Lily." "Clara, do you work for the company that wants to buy our ranch?" Clara was briefly at a loss. "Yes," she said, because lying to a 7-year-old seemed worse than the alternative. Lily looked at her for a moment. "My dad says we're not selling." "Your dad might be right." That seemed to surprise the girl. "You think he's right?" "I think—" Clara stopped, chose words. "I think it's complicated." Lily thought about this. "My grandpa built this ranch," she said, "and my great-grandpa before that. My dad says the land's got our family in it, like—" She paused, searching. "Like how a book's got words. You can't take the words out and still have the same book." Clara stood on the side of the county road with the wind in her face and a 7-year-old comparing land to literature and felt something move behind her sternum that she would not have been able to describe to Preston Wyatt in 1,000 years. "That's a really smart thing to say," she said. "My dad says it." Lily looked back at the road. "Here he comes." The green F-250 came around the bend and slowed when Ethan saw the Tahoe and Clara standing by the fence. He pulled over, got out, walked toward them with his eyes moving between his daughter and Clara with an expression that was neutral but alert. "She stopped because she thought I was lost," Lily said before he could speak. I wasn't. I was reading. Ethan looked at Clara. She's not lost, he confirmed. I know. A beat. She was telling me about the ranch. Something shifted in his face. Not much. He looked at Lily, who had gone back to her book, then at Clara. You got a minute? He said. They stood beside the gate while Lily read. The conversation started about the acquisition, the way their conversations always did, but it didn't stay there. Ethan talked about his great-grandfather arriving in Red Hollow with almost nothing and spending 20 years building the ranch up from a few hundred acres. About his grandfather who'd expanded it through 2 droughts by refusing to sell when every bank in the county said sell. About his father who taught him how to read land, which direction the grass leaned, where the water pooled in spring, what the cattle behavior told you about underground moisture. He didn't say any of this sentimentally. He said it the way you'd describe a set of instructions. Here's how this thing works. Here's what it means. Here's why it matters. Like explaining a language. Clara listened. She'd interviewed dozens of landowners. Usually they talked about property value, tax implications, what they do with the money. Ethan didn't talk about money once. When did you lose your wife? She asked, and then immediately wasn't sure why she'd asked it. It wasn't a negotiating question. He was quiet for a moment. 3 years ago, he said. Cancer. Fast kind. I'm sorry. He nodded once, not brushing it off, acknowledging it. Then, Lily was 4. She doesn't remember her mom as well as I'd like her to. He watched his daughter on the fence rail. I try to tell her stories, keep it alive, but I don't always have the right words. What was she like? Another pause. Longer. He seemed to be deciding something. She loved the spring, he said finally. Used to go down there in the mornings with her coffee and just sit. Said it was the quietest place she'd ever been. He picked at the fence rail without looking at it. That's what I think about when people talk about water rights documents. She used to sit by that spring. Clara said nothing. The wind moved through the dried grass. Lily turned a page. I should let you go, Clara said after a while. Yeah. He didn't move immediately. You doing anything for dinner? She looked at him. Patsy's makes a decent chicken fried steak, he said. It's not a negotiation. Lily likes company. She doesn't get enough of it out here. Clara looked at Lily on the fence rail, reading about a spider who writes words in silk to save a pig from slaughter, crying every time but doing it anyway. Okay, Clara said. Dinner at Patsy's was loud in the specific way of small-town diners, counter stools and formica, and the cook yelling something to the waitress, and a TV mounted in the corner showing local news that nobody was watching. Lily ordered chicken strips and demanded to tell Clara about every book she'd read in the past year, which turned out to be 14, which was more than Clara had read in 2 years. Ethan ate his chicken fried steak and listened more than he spoke, and occasionally redirected Lily when she started repeating herself, which was a skill Clara recognized as the kind that takes practice. Nobody talked about the acquisition. Nobody talked about the spring. At some point, between Lily's summary of Island of the Blue Dolphins and her beginning of The Secret Garden, Clara looked across the table and found Ethan looking at her. Not intensely, just noticing her, the way you notice something when you've been watching it for long enough that it stopped being a background thing. She looked back. He looked away first, at his coffee. She drove back to the Lone Star Inn and sat in the parking lot for a while. The problem with being good at her job was that she knew how to keep the personal and professional separate. She'd been doing it for years. It was a skill she'd refined out of necessity. If you let yourself feel things during a negotiation, you lost the negotiation. Simple as that. But she was sitting in a motel parking lot in a town of 800 people, and she had a spreadsheet on her laptop that showed what the water table would look like in 7 years. And she'd had dinner with a 7-year-old who cried at the same book over and over and kept reading it. And the man across the table had said she used to sit by that spring like it was a prayer. Clara opened her laptop. She pulled up the annexure. She pulled up the aquifer survey. She pulled up the engineering projections. And then she started writing an email to Preston Wyatt that said things she was pretty sure would end her time at Meridian. She wrote it anyway. She wrote it carefully, professionally, citing the specific documents and the specific numbers. She said that the acquisition, as structured, would cause material harm to existing water access for 17 documented properties. She said this constituted a liability that legal had apparently chosen not to flag. She said she needed clarification before proceeding. She didn't send it. She saved it as a draft. Then she went to bed and stared at the ceiling until the sky outside the window started to go gray. Preston called at 7:30 the next morning. She hadn't sent the email, but apparently the questions she'd been asking through official channels, the county records requests, the aquifer data, had flagged something somewhere, because his voice was different when she answered. "I need you to stop requesting county environmental records," he said. Clara was brushing her teeth. She wasn't done, but she put the toothbrush down. "I'm doing due diligence," she said. "That's the job. The job is acquisition. Environmental review is handled by... If environmental review is handled separately, why is an environmental annexure buried in the acquisition documents?" Silence. "Preston." She sat on the edge of the bed. "I need you to tell me what the plan is for the aquifer. I've told you. Engineering handles... The engineering documents say the project will draw from existing groundwater sources at a rate of approximately 11 million gallons annually at full operation. The county aquifer survey shows the spring system has a sustainable yield of 6 million gallons. The math on that is not complicated." Silence again, but different. This one had something in it. "Where did you get a county aquifer survey?" Preston said. "I requested it through the county environmental office, which is public record." "Clara." The voice went lower. "I'm going to be very direct with you. The people above me on this project have made decisions about how it proceeds. Your job is to execute the acquisition phase and close the Callaway parcel. That's all. And the water is not your problem." She sat on the bed in the pale morning light of a Texas motel and felt everything she'd been trying to hold in separate boxes, professional and personal, logical and emotional, survivable and not, stop staying separate. "It's their problem," she said. "The 17 families who..." "Clara, stop." The voice was hard now, the friendliness gone. "I like you. I've always said you're one of the better project coordinators I've worked with. But you need to understand something. If you make this difficult, there are other people who will be brought in to close this deal. And those people will not be as careful with the community relationships as you are. Think about that." She thought about it. She thought about Lily on the fence rail, reading about a spider who made words in silk. She thought about Ethan saying she used to sit by that spring. She thought about Gerald Briggs and his bolo tie and his coffee cup with the Texas flag, saying that's different from being in contact with the people who own the land. "I need to think about some things," Clara said. "Don't think for too long," Preston said, and hung up. Clara sat on the bed for a while. Then she opened her laptop and started looking for everything she could find about the man above Preston Wyatt, the man who was apparently making decisions about how the Red Hollow project proceeded. It took her 20 minutes to find his name. Victor Hale. She'd heard of him vaguely, the kind of name that appeared in business sections occasionally, attached to development projects and real estate deals, and she now noticed as she started reading 2 separate state investigations in the past decade, both of which had been settled out of court. She read for an hour. She read about the Red Hollow project in financial news, buried in a quarterly investor report. She read about Meridian Land Development's parent company structure, which she'd never looked into before, and found Victor Hale's name 3 layers up. Then she opened a new document and started making a list. Everything she knew, everything she'd been told, everything that didn't match. She wasn't sure yet what she was going to do with the list, but she was very sure, in the way of someone who has finally let themselves look at something they'd been avoiding, that she was going to do something. Outside the window, Red Hollow was waking up. A truck went by. Somewhere a dog was barking. The water tower with the old football score stood against a sky that was turning from gray to pale blue. Somewhere about 4 miles east, past the cedar trees and the crumbling county road, a spring was moving cold and clear through the limestone, the same way it had been moving for longer than anyone in that town had been alive. Clara closed the laptop. Then she opened it again and sent the email to Preston Wyatt, the one she'd been sitting on, with one addition. CC, Meridian Legal Department, attention, Ethics Compliance Officer. She put on her boots, the business ones that weren't made for this country, and walked outside into the October morning. She had work to do. And for the first time since she'd arrived in Red Hollow, it was work she actually meant. The email went out at 8:04 in the morning. By 8:47, Clara's phone was ringing. Not Preston this time, but a number she didn't recognize with a Dallas area code. She let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was from someone named Richard Cho, who identified himself as senior counsel for Meridian and whose voice had the particular flatness of a man accustomed to making problems disappear through patience and paperwork. He said he'd like to discuss her concerns in a constructive manner at her earliest convenience, and that the company took all compliance inquiries seriously, and that he hoped she was enjoying her time in Red Hollow. She didn't call him back. She drove out to the county roads and sat in the Tahoe at the edge of Ethan's eastern pasture with her window down, watching the grass move. The aquifer survey was open on the passenger seat. She'd printed it the night before at the motel's front desk printer, which had taken 11 minutes and jammed twice, and she'd stood there in the fluorescent light of the lobby at midnight waiting for it, feeling like someone who had just set fire to something and wasn't sure yet whether it was the right thing or the wrong thing. Both, probably. Most things were. She was still sitting there when she heard a truck coming down the county road from the north and recognized the dark green F-25O before it slowed. Ethan pulled alongside her, driver's window to driver's window, the way people in rural Texas seemed comfortable doing because there was nobody behind them, because there was always enough space. He looked at the papers on her passenger seat, then at her face, which she suspected told him more than she intended. "You eat breakfast?" he said. "No." "Come up to the house. Lily made eggs." Clara looked at him. "Lily made eggs?" "She's been trying to learn. They're not perfect." A pause. "They're edible." Clara followed the F-25O up the ranch road. The house was a low, wide structure, white-painted wood siding gone slightly gray at the corners, a covered porch running along the front, an old wooden swing that looked like it hadn't been painted since before Lily was born. There were boots on the porch steps, small ones and large ones, mud on both. A dog, some kind of shepherd mix, brown and white, aging, got up slowly from the porch and came to sniff Clara's hand with the measured politeness of an old dog who had learned that most people were probably fine. "That's Roy," Ethan said. "He's 13. He'll follow you around and pretend he's still useful." Roy wagged once, as if he understood this assessment and was at peace with it. Inside, the kitchen smelled like coffee and slightly overcooked eggs. Lily was standing at the stove with a spatula, very serious about it, wearing a flannel shirt that was definitely her father's and had the sleeves rolled up 6 times. There were eggshells on the counter. There was a small pile of toast that had gone a shade past golden. "I burned the toast a little," Lily reported, without looking up from the pan. "But it's fine if you scrape it." "Looks great," Claire said. Lily shot her a look that was extremely skeptical for a 7-year-old. "You haven't seen it yet." Breakfast was slightly overdone eggs and scraped toast and coffee from a machine that looked older than Clara's car. Lily sat between them at the kitchen table and talked about a horse named Pepper who had been limping, and whether Pepper's limping was because of the rocks in the south pasture or because she was getting old, which was a more complicated question, Lily explained, because getting old wasn't something you could fix. Clara drank her coffee and listened and thought about Richard Cho's voicemail and the aquifer numbers, and the way Ethan had looked at her papers through the truck window like he already knew something had changed. When Lily excused herself to feed Roy, Ethan refilled Clara's coffee without asking. "You sent something," he said. It wasn't a question. "To our legal compliance office, yes." "About the spring. About the water draw projections." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "I CC'd ethics compliance. I don't know how much it'll accomplish. Meridian's lawyers they're very good at making things look reasonable." Ethan sat down across from her. He had a coffee too, which he held the same way she did, and for a moment they just sat there on opposite sides of the kitchen table with their coffees, like two people negotiating something that had stopped being a negotiation. "They called you already," he said, 43 minutes after I sent the email, which tells you something about how closely they're monitoring this project. "Yeah." He looked out the kitchen window at the pasture. The morning light was flat and bright, the kind that happens in Texas when there are no clouds to soften it. "What happens to you now?" She'd been thinking about that since midnight. "Probably nothing immediate. They'll try to manage me, bring me in for a conversation, reframe things, explain that I misunderstood the documents. She paused. If that doesn't work, they'll sideline me. Bring in someone else to close the deal. And then? And then I'm done at Meridian. She said it plainly, because it was plain. They don't keep people who create compliance friction on active projects. Ethan looked at her with an expression she was getting better at reading. It wasn't sympathy exactly, more like the thing that comes before sympathy, when you're trying to understand the shape of someone's situation before you decide what to feel about it. This job is what you came here for, he said. Yes. The money. Yes. And now you... He stopped. Seemed to be choosing the next words carefully, which she'd noticed he tended to do. You're sure about this? Sending that email? Clara looked at the table. There was a ring from a coffee cup that had been set there many times, a permanent ghost of a habit. Beside it, Lily had left a crayon drawing, something that might be a horse, or a dog, or an unusually four-legged bird. The spring feeds 17 properties, she said. I keep coming back to that number. 17. That's not an abstraction. Those are wells that go dry, animals that need water, people who... She stopped. I've spent my whole professional life being practical. I've been practical about things I shouldn't have been practical about. And I told myself it was because of my situation, my debt, Another stop. At some point that stops being a reason and starts being an excuse. Ethan said nothing for a moment. Then, where does that leave you? I don't know yet. She looked up. It depends partly on what you do with this information. He held her gaze. Outside, they could hear Lily talking to Roy in the patient, explanatory way that children talk to animals, as if the animal is a reasonable party who simply lacks context. Tell me about the annexure, Ethan said. So she told him. All of it. The water draw numbers and the aquifer yield and the 7-year depletion estimate. She laid the printed survey on the table and walked him through it the way she'd been walking herself through it for the past week, and Ethan listened with his forearms on the table and his eyes moving between her face and the documents. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. My great-grandfather drilled that aquifer in 1923, he said finally. The well's still functional. The spring it connects to has been running longer than any record in this county goes back. He looked at the survey. 7 years. At maximum draw, could be longer with conservation measures, but yes, in that range. He put his hand flat on the table. Not a gesture, just setting it down, like he needed something solid. Who is above Preston Wyatt, he said. A man named Victor Hale. He's the chairman of Meridian's parent company. Something moved across Ethan's face. A recognition, brief, contained, but there. You know that name, Clara said. I've heard it. He picked up his coffee. About a year ago, someone from a company I'd never heard of contacted me about purchasing the ranch. The name on the letter was different company, different project. But the land they were describing was the same land, same acreage, same eastern boundary. He paused. I looked into it. That company had the same parent structure as 2 other failed land deals in West Texas that I'd read about. I declined, and I didn't hear from them again. Clara stared at him. You've been watching this. I know what this land is worth, he said, and I know what it would mean to the wrong person to own the water rights. You knew this wasn't just a development deal. I suspected. He set the mug down. I didn't have what you have. He tapped the printed survey with one finger. This is evidence. This is numbers and surveys and documented projections. This is the difference between suspicion and proof. Clara looked at the documents on the kitchen table. She'd come to Red Hollow to take this man's land. She'd spent a week and a half gathering evidence that was now the best tool he had to fight the company she worked for. She wasn't sure how to feel about the geometry of that, except that it seemed like justice, which was a word she hadn't used about her professional life in a very long time. What do you want to do with it? She said. I want to talk to a lawyer. He said it without drama, like it was obvious, which it was. I have one in Abilene I've worked with before. Land law. He's good. A pause. I want to talk to the other families, too. If their water's at risk, they need to know. Meridian will push back. They have a legal department that... I know what Meridian has. He said it calmly, not cutting her off, just stating it. I also know what this land has. 112 years of uninterrupted private ownership, water rights documented back to territorial law, and a spring that 17 families have been depending on without interruption. That's not nothing. His eyes met hers. And now I have someone who was inside the company with documented concerns about a compliance issue that directly affects that water source. Clara understood what he was saying. She sat with it for a moment. That would put me in a difficult position, she said. Yes. He didn't soften it. It would. The kitchen was quiet. Roy had come back inside and was lying under the table with his chin on Ethan's boot. Lily was somewhere down the hall, making the particular kind of noise that children make when they're entertaining themselves, low and narrative, a running commentary on something only they could see. How difficult? Clara asked. Depends on what Meridian does. If they accept the compliance concerns and revise the project, you might be all right. You did the right thing through proper channels. He paused. If they don't, if this goes to state regulators or a court, then you become a material witness, a source, a person who gathered the documents. Another pause. There are lawyers who'd call that whistleblowing. She'd thought about that word. She'd been trying not to think about it too directly, the way you avoid looking at something bright until your eyes adjust. Whistleblower. It was a word that meant something specific in terms of legal protections and also in terms of what your professional life looked like on the other side of it. I have $400 in savings, Clara said. Ethan looked at her. I'm not telling you that for sympathy, she said quickly. I'm telling you because it's relevant. I took this job because I needed the income, and the bonus from this deal would have changed my financial situation significantly. I have student debt and a medical bill, and she stopped. I'm not in a position to be brave without consequence. Nobody is, he said. Being brave without consequence is just preference. She blinked at that. You've already done something, he said. That email exists. You sent it at 8 in the morning to your company's ethics compliance office, and you CC'd legal, and you did it knowing what it would probably cost you. That's already done. He wasn't being warm about it. He was just being accurate. The question now is what comes next. What comes next could cost me a lot more than the job. Yes. He held her gaze. I know. And you're asking me to do it anyway? No. He shook his head. I'm telling you what the situation is. What you do is yours. He picked up his coffee again. But I'll tell you this. If you're willing to stand with us on this, you won't be standing alone. Clara looked at him across the kitchen table in the October light. This man who made his daughter breakfast every morning and repaired his own fences and talked about water rights the way other people talked about family, who had offered her scraped toast and coffee and the truth of the situation without trying to make any of it softer than it was. She thought about the $412. She thought about Preston Wyatt's voice. She thought about Richard Cho's voicemail and the careful flatness of it, the institutional assurance that everything would be handled. I'm going to need your lawyer's number, she said. Something changed in Ethan's face. Not dramatically. He wasn't a dramatic man. But something settled, like a piece of something that had been leaning against a wall finally found its footing. I'll call him today, he said. From down the hall, Lily's voice rose into something that was definitely a hoarse impression, accompanied by what sounded like Roy's reluctant participation. Ethan looked toward the hallway, and something about his expression, just briefly, just for a second, was the thing you see on the faces of people who are holding more than they show. Then it went back to steady the way it always did. The way Clara was beginning to understand was not indifference, but practice. The long practice of a man who'd learned that steady was the only thing he could afford to be. She left the ranch 40 minutes later with a name and number written on the back of a Meridian business card. The card she'd given him at the feed store, now repurposed, which felt appropriate, and drove back toward the motel with the windows down and the cold October air coming through and the printed survey riding on the passenger seat like a verdict. Her phone rang at noon. This time it was Preston. She answered. Clara. His voice was doing something new, a studied neutrality that she recognized as expensive. Someone had coached him between this morning and now. I'd like to propose a conversation. A proper one, face to face. I'm flying to Abilene tomorrow. I thought we could sit down together, clarify some things about the project scope. Flying from Dallas to Abilene, she said, for a conversation. I think it's worth the trip. What changed between this morning and now? A pause. Nothing's changed. I've always been committed to open communication on this project. She almost laughed. Preston, when you called me this morning, you told me the water issue was not my problem. I may have been too abrupt. It's been a stressful quarter. It has, she agreed. I'll meet with you. Tomorrow afternoon, 3 o'clock. Patsy's Diner on Main Street in Red Hollow. She chose the location deliberately. Not neutral, not a conference room, not anywhere that felt like Meridian's terrain. A beat. That's fine, that works. Good. She paused. Bring the engineering projections. The full ones, not the summary. And the Water Rights Amendment, version 2. I know there's a version 2 because the document metadata shows a revision date 2 weeks after the version I have. Silence. 3 o'clock, Clara said, and hung up. She sat in the parking lot of the Lone Star Inn for a minute. Then she took out her personal laptop, not her work laptop, her personal one, the 5-year-old thing she used for everything that wasn't Meridian's business, and started organizing her files. She had more than she'd realized when she laid it all out. The aquifer survey, the annexure, the engineering projections cross-reference, email chains from the past week where Preston had said things that read differently now that she was reading them as evidence. Her own communications requesting county records, time-stamped, documented. A professional record of a woman doing her job, asking the right questions, and being told repeatedly to stop asking them. She organized it into folders, made copies, sent a copy to her personal email and another to a cloud storage account she'd had since college. Then she called her mother in Corpus Christi. Her mother answered on the second ring because she always answered on the second ring, as if she'd learned early that the first ring was for bracing yourself and everything after was just response. Clara, baby, how's Texas? It's Texas, Clara said. Mom, I might be in a complicated situation with work. A pause. Then her mother, who had worked double shifts in a hospital laundry for 30 years and knew something about complicated situations, said, How complicated? I might lose the job. Another pause. Her mother had strong feelings about financial security, for obvious and painful reasons, and Clara waited for those feelings to arrive in the form of gentle but pointed questions about her savings and her debt and whether she'd thought this through. Instead, her mother said, Is it the right thing? Clara watched a red-tailed hawk sitting on a fence post across the highway, absolutely still, watching the grass. Yeah, Clara said. I think it is. Then lose the job. Her mother said it like it was obvious, like it was the simplest math in the world. You can't afford to do the wrong thing. You never could. Clara sat with that for a moment. I love you, she said. I know. A pause. You eating enough? Don't just drink coffee. I had eggs this morning. Good. Whose eggs? A 7-year-old made them. Were they any good? Not really, Clara said. Her mother laughed. Okay, call me. She hung up and sat in the parking lot until the hawk finally lifted off the fence post, caught something invisible in the updraft, and circled east over the pasture. Then she went inside, opened her laptop, and started preparing for the meeting with Preston. Preston arrived at Patsy's at 3:15, which was 15 minutes late, which Clara understood as a statement. He was exactly what she'd imagined from his voice on the phone. Late 40s, good suit that was slightly wrong for the geography, a leather portfolio that probably cost $800. He looked at the diner, the Formica counters, and the mounted bass on the wall and the TV still playing local news nobody was watching, and did something with his expression that he probably thought was professional neutrality. He ordered coffee and didn't touch it. Clara had the engineering projections on the table in front of her, her own copy. She'd gotten there at 2:45, and she'd chosen a corner booth where she could see the door, and she'd had a piece of peach pie, which was the best thing she'd eaten since she arrived in Red Hollow, and she felt the steadiness of a person who has decided something and is no longer in the process of deciding. Preston laid his portfolio on the table and opened it. His own documents, organized, corporate. He'd clearly had someone prepare something. I appreciate you making time, he said. Of course. She folded her hands. Did you bring the version 2 Water Rights Amendment? His jaw did something small and controlled. I brought the complete project documentation, yes, including version 2. Clara, he leaned forward slightly, I want to have an honest conversation. I'd love that. The compliance email, he paused. It's created some friction. At the senior level, people who have invested significantly in this project and who are, understandably, concerned about the implications. What are the implications they're concerned about? That a member of the acquisition team is raising legal flags that could delay or restructure a project at critical phase. He spread his hands. That's not a small thing. No, Clara agreed, it's not. Because if the project proceeds as currently structured, it will deplete the primary water source for 17 properties in the area within 7 years. She tapped the engineering projections. That's not a legal flag. That's a harm. Those are different things. Preston looked at the projections. Environmental modeling is... This isn't environmental modeling. This is arithmetic. The draw rate in the engineering projections exceeds the documented sustainable yield of the aquifer by nearly 2 to 1. That math doesn't change based on who's interpreting it. He picked up his coffee, put it down, picked up his pen. There are mitigation options that... Are they in the documents? A pause. Are there documented mitigation options for the water draw in the project files? Clara said. Because I've read everything I have access to and I haven't found them. Silence. Preston. She kept her voice even. I have been in this county for 2 weeks. In that time, I've met the families whose properties depend on that spring. I've talked to county officials who have spent their careers understanding this land. And I've read every document Meridian gave me, plus some I found through public record. Boss, imantis. She let that sit. I'm not going back to Dallas with unsigned papers and a cleaned-up story. I'm not going to tell Ethan Calloway that the project's fine and the water's going to be okay, because I can't say that truthfully, and I won't say it untruthfully. Bishpatbi. She paused. So I need to know, is there a version of this project that doesn't destroy the aquifer? Because if there is, I'd like to see it. And if there isn't, I need to know that too. Preston sat across from her with his $800 portfolio and his untouched coffee, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked something other than assured. He looked like a man who had walked into a room expecting to manage something and found that the thing had already decided how it was going to go. He was quiet for a long time. Victor Hale wants this project, he said finally. His voice was lower now, more private. Not Meridian wants this. Victor Hale specifically. He has for years. There have been 2 previous attempts, different company names, different approaches. Red Hollow has been on his acquisition list for a long time. Clara went still. What Ethan had told her that morning, about the letter a year ago, the different company, the same land, clicked into place like a key. Why? She said. Because the water rights, Preston said, almost quietly, are worth more than the land. The aquifer sits under the most rapidly developing corridor in this part of Texas. In 10 years, when this region grows the way the projections say it will, whoever controls that water controls. A lot. He stopped. Victor is not stupid. He's thought a long way ahead. Clara stared at him. The development project is a front. The development project is real, Preston said carefully, but it is not the primary objective. She sat back, felt something cold move through her that wasn't the diner's air conditioning. How many people at Meridian know this? She said. Not many. His eyes met hers, and she saw something there that surprised her. Not guilt exactly, but something tired. The expression of a man who has been carrying something uncomfortable for a while and isn't sure what to do about the weight of it. Enough. Do you know it? He looked at his coffee. I know what I know, he said. It wasn't an answer. It was the shape of an answer when someone isn't ready to say the word yet. Clara gathered her documents. She did it slowly, carefully, the way she did everything in this diner, deliberately, because everything in the past 2 weeks had taught her that deliberate was better than fast. I'm going to give you 1 week, she said, to produce a revised project plan with documented alternative water sourcing that doesn't impact the existing aquifer. She put the papers in her bag. If that plan exists, I will continue the acquisition process in good faith. If it doesn't, she paused. Then we both know where this goes. Preston watched her. And if Victor Hale decides he doesn't want to wait a week, then Victor Hale will find out that one of his acquisition coordinators spent 2 weeks gathering documentation of water rights violations and sent them to the Ethics Compliance Department, and that this information is currently in the hands of a land attorney in Abilene. She looked at him steadily. Tell him whatever you need to tell him. She left a 20 on the table for the pie and the coffee and walked out of Patsy's into the October afternoon. The street was quiet. A truck went by with hay bales in the bed. An older woman came out of the post office and waved at nobody in particular. Somewhere down Maine, a radio was playing something country from a decade ago, the kind of song that sounded like it understood something about losing things. Clara stood on the sidewalk for a moment. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel clean. She felt the way she imagined you felt when you'd cut something loose that you'd been carrying a long time. Not free yet, just lighter. Like the weight was still there, just arranged differently. She took out her phone and called Ethan's number. He answered on the second ring. How'd it go? He said. He confirmed it, she said. The water rights are the primary target. The development project is real, but secondary. Victor Hale has been trying to acquire this land and this aquifer for years. Different companies, different approaches. A pause on his end. The letter last year. Yes. She heard him exhale slowly, not dramatically, just the sound of a man receiving information that confirmed something he'd feared. I gave them a week, she said, to produce a revised plan. They won't. No, he agreed. They won't. Which means after a week this goes somewhere else. She paused. Your lawyer, is he ready to move? He's already moving, Ethan said. He filed for an injunction on the survey access this morning. County judge is a former water rights attorney. Another pause. He says the documentation you have changes things considerably. Clara stood on the Main Street sidewalk in Red Hollow, Texas, $412 in her savings account, no certain job, a legal situation that was about to get significantly more complicated, and felt something she hadn't felt in years, maybe longer. Something that didn't have a clean name, not happiness. It was too cold and uncertain for happiness. Not peace. There was too much ahead of them for peace. Maybe just the feeling of being in the right place, doing the right thing, which was its own complicated reward, even when the right thing was expensive. Down the street, through the window of Patsy's, she could see Preston Wyatt still sitting in the booth with his untouched coffee and his leather portfolio, looking at the table. He looked, she thought, like a man who had just understood something that he'd been paid not to understand. Clara turned away from the window and walked toward her car. The afternoon light in Red Hollow was long and flat and golden the way it got in late October, lying across everything at an angle that made even the ordinary things, the water tower, the feed store, the crumbling sidewalk, look like they meant something. She was pretty sure they did. The week Preston had been given did not last a week. On Thursday morning, 4 days after the Patsy's Diner meeting, 3 days after Ethan's lawyer filed the injunction, 2 days after the county judge acknowledged receipt and requested a response from Meridian's legal team, Clara's work laptop locked her out. Not gradually, not with warning. One moment she was reviewing a document, and the next the screen went gray, and a single line of text appeared telling her that her credentials had been suspended pending an internal review. She stared at it for a moment, then closed the laptop. She'd expected it. She'd even told herself she'd expected it. But there's a difference between knowing something is coming and having it arrive. The same way there's a difference between knowing a storm is forecast and standing in the rain. She sat on the edge of the motel bed and looked at the closed laptop and felt the particular silence of a professional life going quiet. Her phone rang. Not Preston, not Richard Cho. A number she didn't recognize at all, which she'd learned in the past week was usually a sign that someone was working hard to be untraceable. She answered, Miss Dawson. The voice was male, smooth, and carried the kind of authority that people spend decades cultivating. Not loud, not aggressive, just the voice of a person who had never once in their adult life been in a room where they weren't the most important person present. My name is Victor Hale. I believe you know who I am. Clara stood up from the bed and went to the window. Outside, the Lone Star Inn parking lot was empty except for her Tahoe and a truck belonging to whoever was in room 7. The sky was overcast. First time since she'd arrived in Red Hollow that the sky had been anything other than clear. I know who you are, she said. Good. Then I'll skip the introduction. A pause, brief, the pause of someone who uses silence professionally. I understand you've had some concerns about the project documents. I also understand you've taken some actions that have created complications. Another pause. I'd like to discuss all of that directly, if you're open to it. She'd been expecting pressure. She hadn't expected Victor Hale to make the call himself. That told her something. Either things had escalated faster than she'd anticipated, or he was a man who preferred to handle important problems personally. From what she'd read about him, probably both. I'm open to a conversation, she said. Excellent. The word landed warmly, which made her trust it less. I want you to know that I have a great deal of respect for what you did. Raising compliance concerns it's the right instinct. It tells me you're good at this job. Thank you. I think there's been a miscommunication about the project scope, specifically about the water sourcing. He spoke carefully, precisely, like someone reading from a document they'd written themselves. Our engineering team has developed mitigation options that weren't properly communicated to the acquisition team. That's an internal failure, and I take responsibility for it. Clara looked at the overcast sky. I'd like to see those mitigation options. Of course, I'm having them prepared. A pause. I'd also like to offer you something, Clara. May I call you Clara? She noted the pivot. First name, offered mid-sentence. An intimacy introduced without asking for permission, only for confirmation. Sure, I'd like to offer you a senior role in the project. Not acquisition, development coordination. Overseeing the entire Red Hollow phase with direct reporting to me. Another pause, for wait. The compensation would reflect that responsibility. Significantly better than your current package. The motel room was very still. Claire could hear the vending machine in the hallway humming through the wall. She thought about the aquifer numbers. She thought about Preston saying Victor Hale has been trying to acquire this land for years. She thought about Ethan's face when she'd told him the water rights were the primary target. That short exhale, the confirmation of something he'd feared. I appreciate the offer, she said. I'd need to see the mitigation documentation before I could respond to anything else. Of course. Warm again, smooth again. I'll have something to you by tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I hope you'll hold off on any further external communication about the project. External communication. The information you've shared with the Callaway legal team. He said it gently, like he was describing something she might have done by accident. It complicates things. I'm sure you understand. Clara understood clearly. She was being asked to pause her cooperation with Ethan's lawyer in exchange for a job promotion and documents that may or may not address the actual problem and may or may not arrive. I'll look for the documentation tomorrow morning, she said. Perfect. The warmth in his voice was the kind that comes with certainty. The warmth of a man who had rarely been told no by someone in her position. I have a feeling we're going to work very well together, Clara. He hung up. She stood at the window for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Ethan. He answered before the second ring. I heard your laptop access was revoked. She blinked. How? Gerald Briggs has a nephew who works in county IT. Meridian's been requesting data access through the county network. When they lock out an internal account, it shows in the log. He paused. Gerald watches things. Victor Hale called me, Clara said. A long pause. Did he? He offered me a promotion. Senior Development Coordinator, direct report to him. She moved away from the window, sat back on the bed. He also said there are mitigation documents that weren't communicated properly to the acquisition team. He's sending them tomorrow. Are you going to wait for them? No. She said it with a certainty that surprised her slightly. Not because she'd been uncertain, but because the certainty had arrived so quickly, so cleanly. But I want to see what they send, because whatever it is will tell us something about how they plan to manage this. You think they'll fake documentation? I think they'll send something real that's framed in a way that obscures the problem. She paused. Victor Hale didn't get where he is by being sloppy. He gets where he is by being very careful about what he shows people and when. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Can you come out here tomorrow? My lawyer wants to talk through everything in person. James, that's his name, James Ritter. He's driving in from Abilene. He's been talking to some people in Austin, too. Environmental law contacts. State level. State level, Claire said. What Hale is doing, or trying to do. It may not just be Red Hollow. James is looking at the previous acquisition attempts in West Texas. The ones with different company names. He thinks there's a pattern. She thought about the reading she'd done that first night. The 2 state investigations, both settled out of court. Both settled, which meant both paid, which meant both real. "I'll be there at 9, she said. The documents from Victor Hale arrived at 7:23 the next morning, sent to her personal email since her work access was suspended, which meant someone at Meridian had looked up her personal contact through public record, which was a small violation that said something about how they operated when they needed something. She read them over breakfast. Motel coffee, a gas station granola bar she'd bought the night before. The documents laid out on the small desk beside the window with the gray sky outside. The mitigation plan was real. That much was true. It described an alternative water sourcing option, a municipal pipeline extension from the nearest town, roughly 11 miles, that would supply the development project's water needs without drawing from the existing aquifer. It was technically feasible. Engineers had signed off on it. The problem was in the timeline. The municipal pipeline would take 3 to 5 years to complete. The development project's Phase 1 was set to begin drawing groundwater in 8 months. The gap between those 2 numbers was 4 years minimum. 4 years of pulling from an aquifer already documented as stressed. The mitigation plan didn't eliminate the problem. It just scheduled it differently and added a resolution that would arrive after the damage was already done. Clara photographed every page. She emailed the photos to herself and to the cloud account. Then she drove out to the Callaway Ranch. James Ritter was not what she'd expected. She'd built an image of a land law attorney from Abilene in her head that involved bolo ties and deliberate speech, something in the Gerald Briggs register. James was 42, looked younger, wore a regular button-down shirt and no jacket, and spoke faster than almost anyone she'd encountered in this part of Texas. He had the energy of a man who had been awake since 5 and had opinions about most things. He was sitting at Ethan's kitchen table with 3 open laptops and a stack of physical files that suggested he'd brought approximately everything with him from Abilene, including possibly the furniture. Lily had been dispatched to a neighbor's property for the morning. Roy was under the table, being old and dignified about all the activity. James looked up when Clara walked in. "The Meridian coordinator," he said, with the particular attention of someone who has been reading about you. "Former coordinator," Clara said. "Right. They locked you out." He said it without ceremony, like it was a piece of data to file. "Sit down. I want to show you something." What James wanted to show her was a map. Not a property survey. A different kind of map. One he'd built himself, pulling together public records and corporate filings from the past 9 years. It was a map of land acquisitions across a 60-mile corridor in West Texas, color-coded by parent company. 5 different company names. 3 different project types: development, agricultural, infrastructure. All different enough on the surface to look unconnected. All traceable, if you were patient and knew what to look for, to the same parent company structure, to the same man. "Victor Hale has been assembling parcels," James said, tracing